Hello and welcome to our Myeloma UK webinar as part of this year's Myeloma Awareness Week, where our very own Low OBE, Chief Executive Myeloma UK, will present a 20-minute overview of the organisation. After the presentation, Eric will answer the many questions we received via email and Twitter from our supporters over the past week. Thank you so much for sending those in. We received a high number of personal case story questions that we will answer, but unfortunately not quite suitable for this Did You Know webinar. We will answer all your questions after the webinar. A recording will also be available on our hub or via YouTube to view at any time. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Eric.
So good morning everybody, my name is Eric Lowe and it's a great pleasure to be able to do this webinar, and thank you all very much for taking the time to sign up. So as you know, this is our Awareness Week, which runs every year from the 21st to the 28th of June, and our focus this year is a Did You Know campaign. And the primary aims of the Did You Know campaign are to raise awareness of the work we do amongst our supporter base, but also importantly to show our gratitude, to demonstrate how your incredible support makes our work possible and changes the lives of people affected by myeloma. But also importantly, our hope is that through the week we can inspire and motivate even more of you to continue to support us. And if you haven't supported us in the past, that you can do so in the future, because I think we're really doing some excellent work on behalf of patients and their families. So I'm only going to speak for 20 minutes because I think the most value out of the webinar will come in the questions that we have received from all of you, and we'll do our best to get through them. But just to start, I'm just going to give a few facts and figures about the organisation, and many of you may know these already. So we were founded in 1997, so we're fast approaching our 20th anniversary, and we've had an exceptional track record and growth rate over these years since 1997, where we now have a team of 35 staff working tirelessly across a whole range of different programs and services. It's totally astonishing to me how much money we raise. This year we will raise close to £3.5 million, and we're extremely proud of our performance in our ability to raise money. And I think what's really important to say is that 80% of that comes directly from our supporter base. So that's people like you that are on this webinar this morning. We receive no direct funding from government or NHS. It's all down to grassroots fundraising, which is really, really incredible. And although we're very proud of our current income levels, we've got ambitious plans for the future to build on the excellent work we've done together over the last 15 or 16 years. So within the next 3 years, we've got an ambitious plan to raise our income to 7 million, so we can do even more to fund world-class research and to benefit patients and their families. What's also important to mention is that we don't see ourselves as a charity, we see ourselves as a business, and we run a very efficient ship, as it were. And I think it's important that our supporters know that we're a very milestone driven and we have a results orientated culture. So we work very hard to be as efficient and as effective as possible, and to make sure every penny and every pound donated by our supporters gets directed to the best possible work that we can do. Another important feature of the organisation is its end-to-end strategic plan. We occupy somewhat of a unique space in the cancer charity marketplace, in so much as we take one specific disease, myeloma, and we try and fix it from the laboratory bench all the way through to the patient's bedside and beyond. And that's the only way that you can really fully and comprehensively fix the problem of myeloma, is to take it from an end-to-end perspective. But above all else, from bench to bedside, we're completely, totally, utterly focused on patients. So the patient voice, the patient perspective, and the patient need features at every single level of the organisation, and every single decision we make is based around what's best for patients. So many of you will have participated in some of the things that we do. So I'm just showing this slide just to show you a flavour of the activity and the volume of work that we get through at Myeloma UK. So each year we have approximately 10 or 11, sometimes 12 patient and family myeloma info days. And each year more than 1,000 people affected by myeloma, whether it's a family member, a patient, friends, will attend info days. We also take close to 3,000 calls per year on our info line. And when you think about how rare myeloma is, that really is quite an astonishing number of calls. Many of you will have heard about our clinical trial network, and we just recently expanded that network from 8 hospitals to 28 hospitals around the UK, which is a phenomenal achievement. And what that means is that patients across the whole of the UK now will hopefully have the option of entering into a clinical study of a new drug that otherwise they may not have been able to access. We also, and I stress to date, have had 100% success rate in getting access to new drugs on the NHS. And while Myeloma UK have played a pivotal role in that, other partners have helped in that success rate too. But the bottom line is we've worked together to make sure that every new drug for myeloma has been approved. We also have a network of approximately 65 myeloma support groups around the country. And in 2014, we will invest £2.5 million into our research programs. And for those of you that are really interested in our clinical trial network, we completed our first study at the end of last year, and the study setup times and recruitment times were a record for a trial in myeloma in the UK, and we've submitted the data. The data has been submitted and accepted to a peer-reviewed publication, and as soon as that is done, then we can then use that data to change clinical practice in the UK. So just a few minutes on what is our strategic approach, what does our strategic plan look like? So our strategic model has been developed to efficiently and systematically address the critical challenges that are slowing down research, the development of and access to new treatments, but also importantly, optimal care, information, and practical support for patients. So this statement emphasizes the bench to bedside, the end-to-end nature of our plan. What's important about it is we're not trying to boil the ocean. We have identified the critical, the most important aspects in the plan that we can focus on, and if we can address them, it will make a tremendous difference to patients. And importantly, because we see ourselves as a business, we work hard to make sure that the entire strategic direction of Myeloma UK and the organisational structure is framed and defined in line with our strategic plan. And that makes sure that every person, every minute of the working day, every penny and pound of investment we get from our supporters is geared towards achieving our strategic aims. And here are the things that we're trying to do at a strategic level. We're trying to accelerate the discovery and development of new effective treatments. As you will all know more than I do, myeloma is a relapsing remitting cancer. We need new treatments all of the time. And historically, it takes a long, long time to get treatments through the system, and it's very expensive. So our job is to accelerate that and to make it as efficient as possible so you can get access to new treatments. But we also recognize that we're not just treating a disease or a cancer, we're treating people that we care deeply about. So we invest a huge amount of time and effort in making sure you get access to the best possible treatment and care on the NHS. And we also are passionate about making sure that you get access to the information and the support to help you cope day to day with everything a diagnosis of myeloma brings. Much of our strategic plan is wrapped up in research, and we tend not to think about research in isolation, i.e. work that's done in a laboratory. We see it as a whole system model. So increasingly we're beginning to refer to our research programs as a research continuum model, so that we continue research all the way from the laboratory through to the clinic where patients benefit, but then importantly to collect outcome results to work out how patients are benefiting for new treatments and feedback into the system. And I'll just spend 2 minutes explaining a little bit about what that continuum model looks like. So from a preclinical perspective, so this is the laboratory bench type work, we invest in our Myeloma UK Research Centre at the Institute for Cancer Research, which is really conducting world-class research into myeloma biology and genetics. And we've organised our research around 3 interlinked research cores: Origins, Oracle, and Optimal. So Origins are looking at the genetic basis for myeloma. Oracle is looking into the factors that make myeloma individual and why different patients act differently on treatment, and the factors that are responsible for resistance. So why does myeloma become resistant to treatment, and why does it come back? And then Optimal then builds on the information that we get from Origins and Oracle, and then begins to test and discover and to find new drugs that are targeted to the information that's generated by Origins and Oracle. So it's a very strategic, very well thought through research plan, and it truly is leading the world. The number of game-changing leading publications that come out of the ICR is probably more than any other research institution in the world. The next stage in the continuum model is you then need to test and translate from the laboratory out into patients. And that's where our Myeloma UK clinical trial network comes into play. And that's the environment in which we test new drugs from all over the world, from the pharmaceutical companies, from academia, in patients in the UK. It's the only clinical trial network of its type in the world, and it is doing really, really fantastic things, and really gives that environment to really accelerate the development of new treatments. Importantly though, as I've alluded to, we care deeply about patients and the environment in which they're treated and looked after, and it isn't just about getting treatment. So we work very hard in a research model to make sure that the NHS environment and all the best practice features are in place, so that not only do you get access to treatment, but you get access to it in the most timely way, in the best possible environment, that treatment's administered to you by a professional, knowledgeable nurse about myeloma. So we work very hard to make sure that environment is as good as it can be. The other thing that we work very hard to do is to make sure that research results are adopted and diffused into clinical practice as quickly as possible. The NHS does some wonderful things, but it has a real challenge in adopting and diffusing innovative research results. It takes a long time for patients to benefit from research, and we must speed that up. These delays are not acceptable, so we work very hard to ensure patients benefit from research results as quickly as possible. One way in which we can do that is to look at really innovative and creative ways by which new drugs are commissioned, about how new drugs are organized in different pathways to make sure the right patient gets the right drug at the right time. But we also need to prove that all of this works, and unless we capture the data on how patients are accessing treatment and what outcomes they have, we will never know if the model works. So we're working hard to make sure we can collect outcome data that will be very powerful to tell us, yes, this model works, and will help us improve the model in the future. And we're also very passionate about getting patient and public involvement. At the end of the day, the ultimate customer of all our work is patients. And if we don't understand what your needs are, what your unmet needs are, what do you need in terms of treatment, what's an acceptable benefit-risk balance for treatment, what side effects do you like, do you not like, not that you like side effects, but which ones are acceptable and not acceptable, what type of administration do you want, how long do you want to be on treatment, where do you want to receive it. These are the things that matter, but these are not the things that researchers in the lab and drug companies are thinking about. So it's up to us to generate the evidence for what you want and feed that back into the discovery and development system. And I don't want to sort of over-egg the point about how innovative our model is, but it's pretty innovative. And at least in the UK, we buck the trend of what historically has always been a response mode type research funding model to a complete new concept in what role patient organisations play. And what we're driving is this idea that the role of research charities and patient organisations has evolved from a primary emphasis on grant funding, so giving out grants to doctors to do research, to a driving force that is advancing scientific development and leading cutting-edge patient-centred research. So what we've been able to do in the UK, as far as is possible, is to bring all of the key opinion leaders together and effectively to write a business plan for myeloma, to write a blueprint so that we have an organised, cohesive, collegiate and strategic approach to how we're going to fix the problem of myeloma. And increasingly, we're beginning to work with international partners. The opposite to that is that we have no plan and we just hand out money to doctors to do research that they're interested in. But when you aggregate the results of that research, you're unlikely to have achieved anything. So it's a very novel, very innovative approach to what we do. And here are just some sort of buzzwords that we use and people use to describe what we do as a way to try and describe the innovative way in which we work. So quite often we're described as honest brokers. So we're the glue that brings the different stakeholders together, all of whom have vested interests and different rewards and incentives. And we broker discussions between these groups to make sure we realign these incentives and rewards and vested interests around a common goal, which is patients. And that, believe it or not, very rarely happened in the past. We're also agents for change. If we're going to be successful and find preventative and curative strategies, stakeholders need to change behaviours, they need to change their models, their way of working, and we can do that. We've done it consistently over the last 10 years. We're also consensus builders. If you ask 10 doctors their opinion about a problem in myeloma, you'll get 17 different answers. So we sit in there and we reach consensus as to what the problem is, what the priorities are, and what the solutions should look like. We also have the difficult conversations. We're quite comfortable sitting in the boardroom of drug companies or with the Department of Health or with NICE and having the difficult conversations that lead to change and lead to solutions. We also don't work and think in isolation. We're not supportive of individual researchers and individual projects. The answers will lie in working in a consortium and working within networks. So we bring great minds, like-minded individuals, and great research from around the UK and around the world together, because the whole will be greater than the sum of the parts. We also facilitate discussions and facilitate meetings that bring different stakeholders that would otherwise be enemies or be adversaries and not work together to get around the table and to find solutions. Despite the fact we're proud of how much money we earn and make and spend, we can't do everything. So what we focus in on is how can we leverage the NHS and leverage other funders and other money and expertise in the system and drive them towards myeloma research, myeloma treatment and care. So we intelligently provide different types of resources and help to build capacity within hospitals and within professional organizations to get more focus on myeloma. But above all else, we're entirely driven by a very clear vision of what the problems in myeloma are and how we as an organization can help to solve them. And we're passionate about what we do, and we have a relentless commitment to what we do. So moving on from our sort of research continuum, I thought I'd just focus for a few minutes on a really, really important part of our work. And if I was sort of given an ultimatum that said, Eric, you can only do one thing, we've run out of money or whatever, what would it be? For me, it would be patient information and support, because I think that's what makes the biggest difference day to day to the lives of patients and families, is what we can do in terms of offering practical advice, emotional support, a listening ear, and high quality information to help you cope with everything a diagnosis of myeloma brings. And many of you will have been involved in our services, and I've just listed a few here. Our free-flowing myeloma info line, which has been ongoing since almost day one of the organisation and has helped thousands and thousands of patients over the years. And we've got a comprehensive interactive website. We've got a really huge range of information guides, booklets, packs and leaflets, and we work extremely hard to make sure that you can get access to them on the NHS when you need them, as well as directly from our website and from us. We've got a network of myeloma support groups around the country, and we're super grateful to the volunteers, the nurses and the support group leaders that run these. And importantly, we've got information to help support carers and children, because behind every patient there's a family that have their own challenges and issues and concerns about what's happening to their loved one. And of course we have one of our most popular programs, our patient and family myeloma info days. And again, above all else, and I can't emphasize this as much, is that as an organization, from top down, bottom up, from left to right, we are 100% focused on patients. It underpins everything that we do in the organization. I think what's important as well is to emphasize that we couldn't be successful, we couldn't do what we do without the incredible support and inspiration and help that we get from a whole variety of partners and collaborators. And I think it's important to mention these, even just in passing, so that you know that the organisation has the support and is sustainable and has input from a whole range of organisations who are supporting Myeloma UK achieve its goals and deliver better treatment, better care and information for patients and their families. And I've just listed a few of our very valued partners here. So the UK Myeloma Forum, which is a professional group of doctors and other healthcare professionals who we work very closely with. The Association of Medical Research Charities, who give us advice on how we do our research and how we do peer review, and are very, very supportive of our very different innovative model. The National Institute for Health Research. So we are official partners of the National Institute for Health Research that allows us to qualify for research support on the NHS, which is extremely important. We also get a lot of support from the National Cancer Research Network and the National Cancer Research Institute. We work very closely with NICE, and many of you will be familiar with NICE, and I think most of you will see them as potentially being the enemy. But for us, they're very much a strategic partner, a very important partner, and we have a great relationship with them, as we do with the other similar bodies in Scotland and Wales. And I think NICE see us also as a partner and even a critical friend. The Institute for Cancer Research, where our main research centre is, have been phenomenally supportive of our work. We have to mention our pharmaceutical industry partners, who at all levels of the organisation have been extremely helpful, and particularly in the context of our clinical trial network, we've got some really exciting, productive and innovative collaborations with industry partners. We've got exciting drugs in the pipeline. Everybody who's involved in a clinical trial network, it is a true network, and it wouldn't be successful without the participation of all the researchers, the nurses, the data managers across the country, and especially our clinical trial coordinating office and leads. We've also got very good relationships and partnerships with NHS England. And I guess above all else, just to pay tribute and thanks to the entire myeloma community, so the nurses and the doctors and other healthcare professionals that support us day in, day out with our work, and without their support, our work wouldn't be possible. But above all else, and many of you are on the webinar at the moment, is that none of this would be possible without the generosity and loyalty of our donors, our fundraisers and supporters, who, despite the adversity in their life living with myeloma, do incredible things to help support our work, and we're deeply, deeply grateful. I think we also have to recognise the support that we get from various volunteers and advocates around the country who locally and nationally support our initiatives, our campaigns, our advocacy efforts, our letter writing campaigns. It's incredible what we can achieve as a group around the country. Another special mention for support group leaders. Running a support group is not an easy task, and we're truly grateful to the efforts and work around the country of our support group leaders, but also what we call our patient experts. So these are the individuals who give presentations, sit on NICE committees, and be expert witnesses in government and in NICE to help advocate for patients. I think a special mention also to our supporters who take part in research. If we don't invest in research and we don't have patients taking part in research, we have no chance of improving outcomes for future patients. So I think it's important to acknowledge the really important role that many of you provide by taking part in research. And also just acknowledge the efforts and the work of my colleagues at Myeloma UK and our board of directors who all work tirelessly to support our goals and our aims and objectives. So I'm just a little over time, but I think it's only a few minutes. So thank you for your time and attention. I know that's been a rather sort of rapid run through the organisation, but I'd be happy to now answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Eric. That was very informative, and I'm sure everybody in the webinar really appreciated the insight into Myeloma UK and the work that you do and we do as an organisation. We've had a lot of questions coming through predominantly via email, so go to the first one. So you mentioned genetic research in your presentation, and someone wanted to know, can you tell them a bit more about what this means for patients and how it might impact on treatment in the future?
Okay, so the important thing at the moment is that we treat patients in a one-size-fits-all manner, but what we know is that some patients respond to treatment and some patients don't, and some patients respond better than others. And what we've discovered over the last 5 to 10 years that in fact myeloma is not one cancer, but is a collection of different types of cancers with very different characteristics underpinned by different genetic signatures. So our ability to define different types and strains of myeloma by genetics then allows us to develop specific treatment strategies that are appropriate for different types of myeloma. So if a patient has myeloma type A, then in the future they will get treatment for myeloma type A, and therefore the success rate of that treatment will be much, much higher than current success rates with current treatment. So when people talk about personalized medicine or stratified medicine or precision medicine, this is what we mean, that the right patient will get the right treatment at the right time for their specific type of myeloma.
Thank you, Eric.
So that means better outcomes, reduced side effects in the future.
Okay, next question. How do you currently work with government, and how does Myeloma UK currently work with government and organisations like NICE? I know you covered this a bit in your presentation. What has been the most significant achievement that the organisation has had with this kind of work?
So I guess the best way to describe it is when we started out sort of 15, 16 years ago, we were very vocal and very angry and very emotional about things that weren't working out for myeloma. But long term, that's not the best approach to be successful. So we see us as being strategic partners and collaborators with the NHS, with the Department of Health, and with NICE. It's much easier to be a trusted, critical friend and sitting around the table and understanding the different perspectives and working together to find solutions. But at the same time, we're not frightened to have difficult conversations, and we're not frightened to have, to push back. But largely, we see ourselves as collaborators and partners. And I think if you look at our success rate, so if you think about our clinical trial network, we were the first cancer charity other than Cancer Research UK to be given NIHR partnership status and the ability to badge and approve our own studies. If you look at some of the things that we've done with NICE, we've had a 100% success rate in getting drugs approved because we've been able to sit down and be a trusted negotiator and broker to make sure that we can mitigate and deal with the issues that NICE have with new drugs and prices and data to find solutions. But I think if I was to pick one thing most recently that's been our biggest success in terms of partnership, is we're now piloting a clinical trial network initiative with a part of NICE called NICE Scientific Advice, which means that we have created an environment where we can have early discussions between NICE, clinicians, patients, Myeloma UK and drug companies to make sure that we're designing the best possible studies to make sure that we don't have the same problems of getting NICE approvals of drugs in the future. And I think we're the only organisation that has that collaboration, and I think it will be phenomenally successful.
Okay, thank you, Eric. The next question. Do other organisations like Cancer Research UK also fund research into myeloma? And if so, what is it about Myeloma UK model that you think makes it different?
Yeah, so other organisations like Cancer Research UK and Leukemia from Research fund research into myeloma, and that's helpful. But the research they fund is not underpinned by a blueprint or a strategic plan or vision. And I think that's the benefit of the Myeloma UK model, is that we've identified the research priorities. We know the research to fund, we know the best places to do it, and we have the systems and the products and the initiatives from bench to bedside to really, really make it happen. So I think the key for us is to work closely with other funders and have them support that vision, or at least fund complementary research, because it's important that every penny and pound that goes into research has the maximum benefit. But I think what our model provides is a higher return on investment. So for more modest amounts of money, we'll achieve much, much greater things that benefit patients.
Thank you. Next question from audience. As I said, I've a lot of questions by email and by Twitter, so please continue to send us any questions you have on Eric's presentation. So the next question is, what are the most effective treatments available now to UK patients, and where? And the second part of this, where is myeloma treatment likely to go in the future?
Okay, so I think there's a number of effective treatments at every stage of myeloma, from diagnosis through subsequent relapses. And I guess the trick is, as far as is possible, is for doctors and patients to discuss and to decide in partnership what is the best treatment for each patient at any point in time. And that could be different in different circumstances, where you balance out the genetics of myeloma, the clinical aspects of myeloma, but what's the patient's preference as well in terms of what treatment they want to receive, what are the risks, benefits, if it's oral or IV. So I think we've got a number of very good treatments, very effective, but I think what's most important is to look to the pipeline to see what's coming next. And if you look at the pipeline in myeloma, it pretty much is stocked full of potential new treatments. Not all of them will come through, but I would anticipate at least one new treatment a year for the next 5 years. But the real skill becomes in how do you construct treatment combinations that are targeted to specific subtypes of myeloma. So I think that's what the future will look like, and patients will get 2 and 3 or even 4 drug combinations that are much more targeted to the specifics and characteristics of their disease, primarily defined by genetics, but also defined by the extent to which their myeloma is affecting them and what their personal preferences are, what their goals are for life. All these things need to be taken into account and when making treatment decisions. And that's what we think of as personalized medicine, not just personalizing the treatment to the genetics, but personalizing the whole holistic treatment care package to the needs of individuals and groups of patients. I also think we'll move potentially to more chronic therapy, where patients will potentially be treated all of the time with different treatment strategies, so consolidation and maintenance, for example. However, from the patient perspective, we need to make sure that if patients are going to receive treatment for longer and more often, that the benefits of doing that are substantially more than having intermittent treatment and treatment-free periods, because not being on treatment is very important to patients.
Thank you. The next question again is a two-parter. Recent reports about a clinical trial involving a modified version of the measles vaccine sounded interesting. Can we expect to see UK patients getting access to treatments like that in the near future?
Probably not, is what I would say, is that if you look at the research that's being conducted, it's wide and varied, and that's really important. But I think that the treatments that patients should focus on are the more conventional ones in the pipeline, so new types of proteasome inhibitors, so new Velcades, new types of thalidomide, and new types of Revlimid. There's a lot of work that's been done with new classes of drugs such as monoclonal antibodies, different sort of targeted biological drugs. That's the sort of next generation that's coming down the line. But as I alluded to earlier, the real skill is in how you construct combinations of these drugs, even currently available drugs, and targeting them towards different subgroups of patients. There is a lot of really other interesting, more experimental research that's going on with viruses and vaccines. And these things should be supported, but I think we need to be cautious and manage expectations around the likelihood of any of these being successful, at least in the short term, but you never know. So it's important that that research is done, but it's probably not going to be where the answers in the short to medium term come from.
Okay, thank you. Will your vision of making myeloma history ever be realised? Will there ever be a cure for myeloma?
Yeah, so in many ways, we already are making myeloma history because our model is so innovative and we're doing things that have never been done before, and I think people, will talk about for years to come. So I think if I think about what do we really mean by making myeloma history, what we mean is myeloma preventative, and is it curable? And I think we've always been cautious as an organization to talk around prevention and cure in the past because that's a tall order, and it may not be the goal. It may not be the goal if we can effectively treat myeloma, and it's something that people can live with long term. However, this speed of research and the speed at which we're increasing our knowledge around the genetics of myeloma means that potentially we can start to think about cures in the not too distant future. I don't think that means that there'll be a cure for all types of myeloma, but it may be for patients with relatively low risk myeloma. We can develop treatments and treatment combinations that knock it back and it won't come back. Potentially for some high risk types of myeloma, the goal may not be cure, but it may be long-term sustainable survival with good quality of life, but the disease will still be there. So I think it's important not to get too carried away, but even for us, I think we can be very optimistic for the future, and I think begin to contemplate that potential curative and preventative strategies could be possible if we continue the way we're going with our understanding of myeloma genetics. And I guess having a more joined up and sophisticated drug discovery and clinical development program within the context of models like Myeloma UK have created, I think that will add huge value and increase the potential that we will make significant step forwards in getting better treatments and hopefully one day prevention and cure.
Okay, thank you. I see we're still getting a lot more questions coming in, so please do keep them coming. We'll try to answer them in the next 20 minutes. A couple of people have, a few people have asked about the effect. What do you think that Professor Gareth Morgan's move to America will have on the acceleration delivery of novel treatments going forward?
Okay, so as most people will know, Gareth and Professor Gareth Morgan and Dr. Faith Davis are world-leading, highly respected, highly credible, very successful myeloma clinicians and researchers. And I think the UK generally, and Myeloma UK especially, have been very lucky and fortunate to have worked with both of them over the last 10 or 15 years. But I think it's important to say also that there are other really great doctors and great things happening across the UK. And although we're disappointed that they have decided to leave the UK to go work in America, we understand the reasons why they would do that. And they're moving to what is arguably the other or the best myeloma research institution globally. So I think we should all be proud of the fact that we've created a research program in the UK and two researcher clinicians that are the hottest property in the world and have been poached by the most successful centre globally. And I actually think it will not in any way have an adverse effect on our research program. And I would argue that it would have the opposite effect. It will actually help us, because now we've got the potential to collaborate with the other, world-class, there's many world-class research institutions, but the one at Little Rock is up there with the best of them. So I think that puts our research program on the international stage now. And I think we can combine efforts, combine resources, and to combine brains to do an even better job of unpicking the mysteries of myeloma from a genetic perspective, and to collaborate on the acceleration in terms of how we do clinical trials. So I think while it's got its potential downsides, most of it is upsides. And so I think it puts us in a very powerful and very positive position moving forward.
Okay. And this was regarding the clinical trial. Should every myeloma patient take part in the clinical trial if they're able to? And what are the benefits of taking part in a clinical trial?
So obviously we're really strong supporters of clinical trials. But I think the most important thing is that patients, along with their doctors, need to decide what the best course of treatment is for them. And sometimes that's a clinical trial, and sometimes it's not a clinical trial. So we wouldn't advocate any patients going into studies that that's not the best treatment option for them. But what I would say is that if you're given the opportunity to take part in a clinical study, I would certainly say give it serious thought, because I think it's really, really important that we do clinical research, that the treatments that you're all receiving today, you're receiving because patients in the past went into studies. And I think while there's no guarantee that patients who are in studies benefit, what the data shows is that patients tend to do better in studies than out of studies. And we want to improve future treatment. And I think what we're doing in the UK is really putting together a portfolio of really high quality, high class clinical studies that aren't just about getting access to treatment, but they have a very, very important research question that underpins them, which means that in the future, hopefully, we'll have the right type of data and evidence that will ensure patients get access to the best possible treatments. And arguably, we've not had that over the last 10 years because there's been a mismatch between the studies that are done and the type of evidence and data, for example, that NICE need to make decisions. So I think that clinical research is very important, and if patients have the opportunity to take part, they should give it serious consideration. And also importantly, if you're given the opportunity to provide a tissue sample, that is probably the most important thing that you could do to support current patients and future patients, is to provide a tissue sample.
Okay. Thank you. And please do keep them coming in. So we've got the next question. Again, about clinical trials. In finding out about a clinical trial near you, how do people go about doing that?
So I think two ways. One is ask your doctor or nurse what clinical trials are available and open or are in the pipeline at your hospital or at a hospital near you. But Myeloma UK have a clinical trial tracker on our website. So all the currently open clinical studies in the UK are contained within a searchable database on our website. So you can click in and search via geography, words, stage of disease, phase of study, and you will see a list of all available clinical studies in the UK and a list of the hospitals in which these studies are open. So I would encourage everybody to have a look at that. What's important though is, for the most part, each institution only has a limited amount of spaces available within each study, and every study has stringent entry criteria, which means patients need to have specific characteristics in order to be a candidate for the study. And quite often, even although patients want to take part in clinical trials, they don't meet the entry criteria. So I think in general, there's lots of information on our website about which studies are open and where they're open. I'd encourage you to speak to your doctor and nurse. And I think if your institution or hospital doesn't have clinical trials open or doesn't have that many, you as patients and family members should really question why that is. You know, really push your doctors to make sure that they have an active portfolio of clinical studies, and that will ensure that you will always have treatment options available to you.
Thank you. And a question on, I think, going back to your highlighting the fundraising, someone has asked, where does the majority of your income come from?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the vast majority of our income currently comes from our supporters, so patients and families. It's somewhere around the 80% mark. So things like sponsored walks, coffee mornings, growing beards, all kinds of activities, really phenomenal stuff, direct debits, legacies, all kinds of things. That's where our money comes from. And increasingly, I think our ability to get money from other sources is going to increase. So our model is attracting a lot of interest from government, a lot of interest from the pharmaceutical industry and universities. So I think increasingly we'll set up partnerships with companies that will have a commercial aspect to it, where we'll get money from companies to do research, but that may not happen and it may be a long way off. But right now, the support that we get comes from our patients and families. And I think, you know, we think very carefully, but I think, wow, you know, these guys have got so much going on in their lives and they're dealing with myeloma, but yet they still find the time to support us and the energy to support us. But the feedback that we get is that actually doing fundraising is therapeutic. It's a really good way to channel energies and emotions and anger and this willingness to help and to do something good for your family member, friend, or loved one. And sometimes a fundraising event or some sort of fundraising is a great therapeutic tool to help you come to terms with and deal with and have some fun around what is a very difficult situation. And oftentimes in the past, you know, I've sort of given, when I say given, but, you know, said, yeah, it's okay to give marathon places and different things to family members with no intention of them raising money, just because therapeutically it's a great way to channel emotion, to channel anger and hope, and to do something really, really positive. So I think that there are so many benefits of doing fundraising.
Right, thank you. That's quite a long question regarding personalised treatment from one of our supporters. They've read in various literature and healing currencies that personalised patient treatment is the way forward in the UK. And in Europe, cytogenetic testing is quite common, and is this starting point determining whether a particular treatment will be effective for a particular person? However, they have discussed it with their consultant and learned that the testing was not done in the UK. And the question she asked is the UK lagging behind the rest of Europe in providing basic data, and if so, what is being done about it? Okay.
All right, so there are several aspects to that question. I think what I would say is that in terms of the research and science that's done in cancer genetics or disease genetics generally, the UK leads the way. in Cambridge and Oxford and London and Glasgow, and we are the world leaders in genetic research. The challenge is that sometimes other countries adopt that quicker than us. If we look at myeloma specifically, the work that's been done at the ICR and at other places in the UK, we're leading the world in understanding myeloma genetics, and we're leading the way in terms of identifying different groups of patients with different genetic characteristics. Now, the next part of the question is Europe ahead? Is the US ahead? Probably not is the answer, because Europe's a very diverse place. There's a range of companies from, a range of countries with good economies, a high spend of GDP on healthcare, a high prioritization for healthcare, and those that aren't. Most genetic testing that's done anywhere in the world currently is done in the context of clinical research. So it's funded through a clinical research grant as opposed to on the NHS. So I would argue it's not true necessarily that patients in Europe are getting genetic testing done routinely on health systems and their treatment is then being directed based on that genetic test. This is all quite new in myeloma, and what I would say is that the UK is probably ahead of the curve. Through Myeloma UK and its partners, we're very focused on making sure that patients benefit from the potential of personalised and stratified medicine as quickly as possible in the NHS. If you look at our research model, we're doing the research at the ICR, and we have our phase 1, phase 2 clinical trial network that will test the hypothesis of stratified medicine in patients. So I think we're actually ahead of the game, but we are early on in the game, and that's the importance of doing the research. It's the research that will give us the evidence that we need to direct treatments and to design treatments that are specific to individual patients or groups of patients.
Okay, reassuring, but we've got a little way to go. And so the next question is again about money and for Myeloma UK, and how much do we invest in research programs specifically?
Okay, so this year we'll invest approximately £2.5 million into our research programs. A proportion of that will come out of our designated research reserve. So anybody that's sort of panicking and saying, well, you only raised 3.5, how can you spend 2.5? But we've built up a kind of research reserve, which we did strategically, and I think that's one of the biggest successes actually of the organisation, is we've been able to build up modest amounts of money that have allowed us to commit to these very big, very powerful, world-class research programs. But don't just think about it as 2.5 million, because the investment, the infrastructure investment that leverages is phenomenal. So within our clinical trial network, every Myeloma UK clinical trial gets 80% of its costs paid for by the NHS because we're research partners. At a laboratory level, we've got investments of several £million from drug companies to fund the sort of bolt-on scientific questions that relate to our clinical studies. So probably we are directly and indirectly investing 10 or 15 or 20 £million a year into our myeloma research programs, either directly from our bank account or through leaving infrastructure investment that's already in the system, or directing money from the bank account of drug companies or other organizations into our research centers. So it's really powerful. But what's important is not to equate the success with the amount of money you spend. There are other organizations that may spend 10 times as much as us on myeloma research and achieve nothing, because it's not underpinned by a rational, sophisticated, cohesive strategy. And that's why we've been so successful, and we're often described as punching above our weight. We know what we're doing. We know the research to fund. We're smart in terms of how we do it. So our pennies and pounds go so much further than I would argue any other research funder of myeloma research anywhere in the world.
Thank you. Another question we've had via email is, what is Myeloma UK doing to ensure that myeloma is diagnosed earlier? Do you work directly with GPs?
Yeah, so that's a very, very good question, and it's a very important area for our work. If you look at all the published literature, it says that of all cancers in the UK, the one that is most likely to be diagnosed late is myeloma. And the statistics are pretty harsh. And if you think about the modest benefits that sometimes new treatments have, particularly relapse refractory stage, if we had just a little bit of that investment in early diagnosis, you would have a dramatic improvement in survival and outcomes for a lot of patients. So we do work very hard in the area of early diagnosis, and we have done so almost since the beginning of time at Myeloma UK. We've got a whole program for early diagnosis. We've got very good relationships with GPs and the College of GPs, and we work very hard to raise the awareness of symptoms of myeloma within general practice and within other hospital departments, so that they suspect myeloma sooner than they have done in the past and refer patients to a hematologist to get the tests done.
Okay, thank you. And the patient info line that someone's highlighted, is it also available to family and friends of myeloma patients who may have some questions?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, around 40% of callers are family and friends. And it's quite interesting because, you know, the whole family effectively is diagnosed with myeloma, and many family members have different information, support, and sort of practical needs. And it's quite difficult sometimes for family members to ask their questions in the consultation because it's dominated by the doctor agenda or by the sort of patient issues. So it's support groups, on the discussion forum, on our info line, at info days. I would say on average 40% of our activity comes from family members and carers who are asking very different questions to those that patients ask, and it's very important. And if you were to ask me, where do you think your business will grow in the future? What do you want to do next year you're not doing this year? I would say one of the areas that we want to focus more on is what we do for carers and family members.
Okay, thank you. Again, lots of questions coming through. We've only got a few more minutes left to answer all your questions by Twitter and email. And the next question we've got is, how can I be sure my consultant is aware of the latest and best treatments for me? Do Myeloma UK help support consultants stay up to date? And I think that's probably related to the last question.
Yeah, so as part of our sort of best practice NHS environment work, we spend a lot of time and a lot of resources working with doctors to keep them up to date with what's happening in myeloma research, latest treatment. But importantly, we work with doctors to have them understand the policy environment and the policy challenges that they have locally, because their ability to navigate that will help them get access to kind of best treatments. And we also spend a lot of time working with doctors to have them better understand patients, so they can become more patient-centric and more patient-focused in how they kind of work with patients. So there's numerous things that we do to work with and educate doctors and healthcare professionals. And just to pick on one is we have an online myeloma academy for doctors and nurses and GPs, where there's a whole range of high quality educational and informational resources. There's videos, there's tutorials, there's challenging cases. There's all different things that nurses and doctors can do to really keep up to speed. You know, we give presentations, we send out e-blasts and e-zines, we have round tables. We work really, really hard. However, some patients aren't necessarily treated by out-and-out myeloma experts. They're treated by general hematologists who also do a whole range of other work in their hospitals, and it's more difficult for them to keep up to speed. So we focus on them particularly. We also invest in clinical guidelines. So we work on guidelines as a means to define what best practice is and to distribute and diffuse these around the country to make sure patients are getting access to the best possible treatment. And there's a degree of equity across the country that no patient in one particular area should be getting any worse or better treatment than another.
Thank you. And I think we are about to kind of wrap up. We've got a couple more questions, and that's us nearly finished. But what is the success rate of stem cell transplants, and the do's and pros far outweigh the cons, like for feeling really ill, someone has asked?
Yeah, so high-dose therapy and stem cell transplantation remains, I would say, a standard of care in younger and/or fitter patients. I think the emphasis on it and its role has changed over recent years because of an improvement in and the sort of introduction of novel therapies. So I think the induction treatment that patients get prior to high-dose therapy and stem cell transplant has improved dramatically, and the treatment that a patient might get afterwards in terms of consolidation or maintenance has improved. So the business of transplantation has changed in emphasis, but it remains a very effective way to debulk and get rid of a lot of disease very quickly. As with other treatments, there are some patients that respond better to transplant than others, and there are some patients that have a tougher time than others. And again, we're beginning to understand why that is because of genetics. So you can see the patients are most likely to respond well and those that aren't. So I would anticipate, as with other treatments, the success rate of transplants will increase because only patients that we know will respond will get one, and those that are going to do badly will not get one. But overall, it's a standard of care the world over. Transplants are very effective. They don't work in everybody, but they probably work in 70 to 80% of patients. And these patients, what the data says, get a longer and more durable and deeper remission.
And she asked about the time for recovery.
It's variable. I mean, some patients are up and running within 7 to 10 days. Other can take 3 to 6 weeks or several months. There's no rhyme and reason to it. It's difficult to predict. Mm-hmm. But what's really improved with transplantation is the supportive care around the transplant and after transplant care. So I guess in my experience, I think that patients get through the transplant more easily than they did 10 years ago, and the support available to patients afterwards has increased dramatically. It is a tough procedure to go through. There are some side effects. But I think for most patients, the benefits definitely outweigh the potential risks and the chance of side effects.
Great. As I say, we did receive a high number of personal case story questions that, as I say, we'll answer them after this webinar individually. So finally, we're going to look at another couple of questions after the seminar, after the webinar. But thank you so much, Eric, for running through everyone's questions. As I say, we've got lots more to answer, but we've run out of time, unfortunately. So, as I say, just email and tweet any other questions that you have. But thank you, everyone, for tuning in to today's webinar. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something new about Myeloma UK. As I highlighted earlier, a recording of this webinar will be available on the Hub or via YouTube to view any time. And I hope you enjoy the rest of Myeloma Awareness Week. Please continue to raise awareness of Myeloma UK and the vital work we do by sharing our new digital campaign video, either by email or sharing and retweeting on Facebook and Twitter using the hashtag Myeloma Awareness Week. Thank you so much.